Despite the misgivings among Ukrainians, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says he's satisfied with the summit's outcome after speaking to Trump. In his comments to German broadcasters, he suggests Russia has altered one of its key demands.
Of course, there is also the question of what territorial concessions Ukraine would be prepared to make, if any. And there is one point that President Trump rightly pointed out. Russia seems prepared to conduct negotiations along the so-called contact line and not along the administrative borders. That's a huge difference, because Russia is making claims to territory that has not yet been occupied militarily by Russia.
Michaela Küffner is our chief political editor. Michaela, is this good or bad news for Ukraine and Europe?
Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, first of all, there is some headway being made in getting a commitment from Vladimir Putin, if that actually then becomes really true, that he would agree to the contact line being seen as the real territorial dividing line one speaks about. At the same time, a lot of taboos have been broken here over the past 24 hours. First of all, a ceasefire was firmly seen by the Europeans, by Ukraine, as a precondition, as a starting point for negotiations. And now we have these lightning speed commitments. Even Donald Trump's own press people were briefing the American press until that meeting took place, saying that it was not a negotiation, that this was the starting point for talks. Well, this seems to have completely changed. These were clearly negotiations, and now Vladimir Zelensky is presented with half-baked commitments, and the big question, what these security guarantees could mean. There is huge concern that on the Russian side, Vladimir Putin might see a unilateral just declaration of security as a security guarantee. And the Europeans and certainly Ukraine want to see material guarantees, potentially troops on the ground, guarantees for delivery of weapons, support for Ukraine, ideally, and that is the key point, guarantees personally from the US President Donald Trump. So there's a lot of expectations of these, which will also be, in a sense, negotiations between Donald Trump, Vladimir Zelensky, and potentially some European partners.
So, Michaela, where specifically do you see these security guarantees come from when it comes to troops on the boots on the ground, for example?
Well, that is something that clearly is a red line for Donald Trump. That could be an expectation towards the Europeans. So this will pose European leaders, Friedrich Merz, Emmanuel Macron, who previously always refused to rule that out, with fast decisions that need to be made with an unprepared public. There has been no talk of boots on the ground, but security guarantees means a potential avenue to EU membership being kept open, potentially an avenue towards NATO membership, which doesn't look on the cards at all at the moment. There a secure path to Ukraine's military being allowed to have its current size, or not having any limitations placed on that. An avenue for EU partners to continue their support also in terms of military equipment and weapons. These are all very detailed questions that need to be considered, and it looks like Donald Trump doesn't have the patience for this. He's pushing for final settlement fast, and this clearly is a win for Vladimir Putin, who clearly managed to push his own agenda there with fast decisions being made, and the Europeans trying to keep up that pace and keep pushing their concerns that this all needs to be part of an overarching security structure for Europe as a whole.
Okay, well, the next step in diplomacy is Zelensky's meeting with Trump in Washington on Monday. Is there going to be European involvement in that?
That is still unclear. Government sources have told me here that there has been no direct invitation towards European leaders from the American side, but that Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, was told that he is free to bring European allies along. Now, whether that actually counts as an invitation, whether that is what Volodymyr Zelensky himself wants, whether that is something that is well coordinated within the US government, we simply do not know. I've been told that once that has been substantiated, decisions will be taken. So we will learn this, I guess, until over the coming hours, over the course of Sunday, who in fact will be sitting around the table. But yes, of course, it is important for the Europeans to also be seen sitting around that table as well. That would be a win for the European side.
It'll be interesting to see if that's just a +1 or more. Chief Political Editor Michaela Küffner, thank you. Thomas Graham joins us now. He's a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, co-founder of the Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies program at Yale University, and joins us from Newport, Rhode Island. Thank you very much for being on DW. Has this summit actually started a viable process to a peace agreement all of a sudden?
Well, that we're going to see in the next few days. What I think is true is that we're going to see a much more increased diplomatic effort at this point. Zelensky in Washington on Monday, potentially another meeting between President Trump and President Putin. Obviously, at lower levels, there will be a lot of conversations, not only between Russia and the United States, but between the United States and Kiev, our European allies. So we're in the beginning of, I think, an intense diplomatic effort, and that could force people to focus on the tough compromises and trade-offs that are going to have to be made if we're going to bring this conflict to a resolution.
So a boost in diplomacy, but uneasy concessions for which side?
I think it's uneasy concessions for both sides at the end of the day. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has made that point from the very beginning. It's obvious when it comes to Ukraine, and a lot of that has been discussed in the press. But Moscow will also have to make certain concessions. The full nature of those won't be clear until we engage in a much more comprehensive diplomatic process.
Why do you think Russia will also have a tough time here when Putin comes out of these talks saying that they were very open and rich in content, sounding extremely positive?
Well, in part, it's because of the objective situation. We focus on the grinding progress that Russia is making on the battlefield, on the problems that Zelensky has at home, and some of the tensions in the transatlantic relationship. But it's important to remember that the progress on the battlefield is coming at tremendous cost to Russia, certainly in terms of lives lost, but also in economic development. And the problem for Russia is not so much what is happening in Ukraine, but where the effort in Ukraine is causing Putin to lose sight of the requirements that Russia needs to maintain itself as a major power into the future. It's losing its economic competitiveness. It's falling behind technologically. That's certainly true when it comes to the United States and China. Europe is much more united now than it has been previously. And India is probably advancing more rapidly technologically than Russia is at the moment. So if Russia does not bring this conflict to an end in the near future, it's going to find itself as the weakest of the major powers on the global stage. That is something that Putin should not accept.
Mm-hmm. So do you think reality is sinking in, that for both Putin and Zelensky, they're getting nowhere with this war?
I think that's absolutely right. And President Trump is right in saying that there's actually no victor in this conflict. They're both losing at this point. The sooner they get to a settlement, the better off they're going to be. Now, the concessions will be uneven. Ukraine is not going to regain all its territory. It's probably not going to be able to join NATO, but it does have the promise of security guarantees. And President Trump seems to be relenting on the U.S. position, arguing, or at least saying more recently, that the United States might play a role. So there is a positive outcome from Ukraine that preserves an independent and sovereign Ukraine, that gets to choose its geopolitical orientation, that begins to move closer to the Euro-Atlantic community. And that could lead to a very promising future for Ukraine, despite all the tragedy of the past 3.5, 4 years.
But when you say security guarantees, are you talking boots on the ground?
Well, all this is up in the air. We'll see whether Western countries are prepared to put boots on the ground. They haven't up to this point. Russia has been adamantly opposed to that. But again, we don't know what the full outcome is going to be until you get engaged in serious negotiations. And what happened in Anchorage yesterday may be the start of these serious negotiations. At least I think there are hopeful signs that that's the direction we're moving in.
When it comes to soldiers, we've heard from the UK, for example, that it could be interested in sending some sort of forces. Do you see Europe's voice being heard here in any of these talks? It seems to be left out so far.
Well, not actually. President Trump has had many conversations with European leaders over the past several months. In the run-up to the summit itself, there was a video conference with European leaders. He's talked to Europeans afterwards. I mean, this is one of the subtle changes in the U.S. position, I think, that not sufficient attention has been paid to. At the beginning of the Trump administration, President Trump wanted to act as a mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Over the past several months, his positions indicate that he's paid much more attention to our European allies, to the Ukrainians themselves. He's playing less the role of a mediator than someone is trying to manage a very complicated relationship among the Europeans, the Ukrainians, and the United States, and bringing that to the conversations he has with Putin. That, I think, is an important and subtle change that augurs well for the long-term resolution of this conflict.
What do you expect we can get out of Monday's meeting between Zelensky and Trump?
I think we can get an agreement to move the process forward. Now, we know that Trump has stopped talking about immediate ceasefire and talked about a comprehensive peace agreement. If we think of the comprehensive peace agreement as a two-stage process, that is first the process where we agree to what you might call a framework agreement. That is a set of principles and parameters that would lay out or guide the final settlement of the conflict. That is something that could be reached in the next few months. And if the agreement were that once you have a framework agreement, a ceasefire comes into place, this would be something that would be advantageous to Ukraine as well. So the question, I think, for the Monday meeting is whether President Trump and President Zelensky they come to some agreement on what those principles and parameters might be. And President Trump can then decide how those compare to what he heard from Putin over the weekend. And that begins a process back and forth that could lead, as I said, to a framework agreement in the relatively near future.
Thomas Graham, Yale University, thank you very much.
Thank you.